'25 Forest Road. That is the new movie from writer-director Stephen Cognetti. Who's Stephen Cognetti, you might ask? Well, he is the man behind the Hell House LLC movies, a series of found footage movies that have garnered a cult following. The first one especially is a pretty scary movie. But this is not a found footage movie. This is a traditionally filmed movie, but it is still a spooky ghost story. So what is the story? It focuses on a family of three. Interestingly, it's not the traditional family unit. We have a married couple and the husband's younger sister. Younger, but still an adult. So probably of college age. So these three individuals buy this house in this small American town. But everyone in the town seems really skittish and kind of weird and almost like they're keeping some type of dark secret. And it's not long before we soon see evidence of the paranormal. A strange woman sort of dressed in black kind of appearing in awkward places. And it turns out that there is a local legend that pretty much everyone believes that there is this kind of ghostly figure that has been haunting this town for the last 50 years or so. And it affects people, making them commit suicide, sometimes attacking them more overtly. And people are so afraid of this particular entity they can't even talk about it, but it seems to affect nearly everyone. So this family, new to this kind of area, what are they going to do? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. So Stephen Cognetti, his even the lesser Hell House movie films have been, reasonable. I think he's learned a good lesson in how to build tension, and I think that is evident in this movie. Because this definitely has an element of creepiness. Cognetti actually employs a slightly different to normal technique of storytelling in this one. So the film is split up into 4 chapters, 3 of which are divided to the 3 central characters of this family. The 4th being the kind of finale that involves really all 3. So we actually end up repeating events from the different characters' perspective. Not every event, and we get a little more context as the film goes on. But it gives you the complete picture once you've seen all 3 individuals' perspective. And I think it's a neat story idea. I think it has a little bit of a drawback, which we'll touch on in a bit. But it does make the movie feel somewhat sort of its own voice in a way. It's not telling a story in the traditional sort of linear way, so to speak. It has trying to carve out at least somewhat of its own identity. So I do respect that. The movie does have a good amount of creepy moments. They are the typical cliche horror moments, and again we'll touch on that. But nonetheless, I do think they're still effective, and some of the kind of the kind of horror imagery is quite subtle. The film doesn't make a big song and dance about some of the shots. You'll just see this kind of woman in the background when sort of someone's closing a door, and you'll kind of see a figure in the background and stuff. Sometimes it's more overt, but there are times here where you'll just kind of see this kind of dark figure in the background, and sometimes you might even miss it, I would say. But it does make this kind of presence feel quite significant because it's often there. This is not a presence where we barely see it. We see it quite a lot, but sometimes you might, actually even as a viewer, might miss it. But our characters in the film are kind of unaware for a lot of the time until it becomes a little bit more overt. The movie sets up an interesting kind of mystery in regard to the kind of the backstory of this kind of this character who may be haunting, and you know, gives some sort of tragic past. The acting, I think, is reasonably strong by the characters. I mean, no one here, I don't think, is going to really stand out as a particularly strong performance, but no one here was a clunky performer. I think everyone did a job in a perfectly good manner here, and you believe everyone in their roles, which for a kind of a somewhat no nonsense horror movie, that's really the best you can kind of ask for here. The effects are pretty reasonable. There's one or two occasions where the CGI aesthetics will kind of be a bit more obvious, but for the most part, I think it's fairly sort of strong on the most part. And the film, I think, you know, is ultimately a pretty engrossing story that I think does have some genuine chills. And if you're a fan of the kind of the Conjuring kind of style paranormal movies, I think it's a fairly good movie in that respect. Fairly entertaining, fairly engrossing story, quite a good mystery. You'll notice I'm not really saying it's outstanding anyway, and that is true. I think this movie is fine, probably above average in some areas, but I never really, I think it excels in any particular way, because the movie relies a little bit too heavily on visual tropes that we've seen many times before. Here's one that I have said in many a review, is that this movie does it so much, like so much. We have an entity that appears visually behind characters when they are looking like in the foreground, for example, and then when the character turns around, they go. So that says to me that this entity is making itself visible, but then can go invisible or disappear. But why become visible when no one is looking? Only we as the audience can see it. So are we as the audience meant to sort of like, oh look, we can see something, but why would it appear? It always strikes me as that doesn't really make sense. It always takes me out of these movies. That might be nitpicky. I've seen no one else complain about this, but it's such a kind of common trope where we see something in the background, someone turns around and it's gone. Why is that thing appearing when the character in the film can't see it, but we as the audience can? It doesn't make sense. It annoys me. But that might be a nitpicky thing. I have said it so many times, and we'll move on from that. So it's kind of that sort of typical jump scary moments. You know, something kind of moves quickly and jarringly. So it does, on other things, it just kind of ends up being somewhat sort of typical in its approach to kind of like ghost story tropes, kind of paranormal and supernatural imagery that we've seen many times before. It's done reasonably well, but I don't think it's particularly kind of fresh or innovative in any kind of way. It just seems like, you know, lots of what we've kind of seen before. I think the mystery is interesting, but the kind of the entity seems like way powerful and can do like pretty much whatever it wants, depending on what the script wants us to do, including going in two places at once, apparently, like quite a distance away. And I'm thinking, this kind of entity just seems to be able to do whatever. Possession, you know, apparitions, appearing in two places at once. It's more corporeal. It can grab people. It can kill people. It can control people. It just seems to do anything. And I feel the kind of this unleashed supernatural entity seems like, for a ghost, I mean, obviously we're talking about fantasy stuff here. We're talking about stuff that, you know, arguably doesn't exist, but it just seems to be a way sort of a powerful entity. Really, I think to be a haunting, to be honest. And it just seems the actual story is given. It's in a bunch of exposition. We don't see it. But, you know, it's relatively innocuous. It doesn't seem anything, you know, like that particularly special compared to any other kind of tragic ghost story. But this kind of entity just seems like way overpowered, but really does what the script wants to happen. So, you know, I kind of found that a little bit silly at times. And I think when you're dealing with the movie where you're dealing with the supernatural, you know, I think you've got, as a writer, you've kind of got to rein yourself in to a degree and try and limit what your antagonistic thoughts can do to a degree. Otherwise, it just seems like it just can do anything that the writer wants it to do. It's too much of a MacGuffin. The technique of having these chapters, the first 3 being the same period of time but through different characters' interactions, gives the movie some identity. But I will say you end up kind of re-watching scenes that you've had before. And when you're kind of watching the same series of scenes, you know that everyone up until the end of that section is where they're going to end up. So it sort of deflates the tension because we might see individual characters, certain reactions to things and how they are internalising it. But we know the end point because we've seen it in the first chapter, we've seen it in the second chapter, and then we see it again in the third chapter. So we kind of know where these characters are going to end up, and then we're watching sort of different versions of these events or different kind of perspectives of these events like 3 times in a row. So I feel it's like time wasted to a large degree. So I appreciate the attempt here to have a non-linear method of storytelling, but I don't think it necessarily completely works, because I think it has that sort of drawback. And I have to say as well, it's one of these movies where there is clearly supernatural stuff going on. The characters don't really discuss it. They don't have a frank and honest conversation about it and what they're going to do. Everyone just kind of more or less kind of keeps it to themselves, even though it's relatively obvious that other people are experiencing stuff. And again, it's just these kind of this writing I don't think is quite as strong, maybe. So this movie ends up being quite a lot of kind of like horror cliches and storytelling cliches, and it's not ultimately a particularly smart movie necessarily. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's dumb, but it's just very typical. It's just very much like a standard kind of haunting film. That being said, I do think there are enough eerie moments here and enough reasonable kind of scares to actually make this worth watching, and to probably put it as a slightly above average movie whilst not being massively memorable. So I'll give it a 6 out of 10 because it does have a few good chills and the story is reasonable, even though I don't think it's completely successful. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.